Sevgili arkadaşlar, bu haftanın telafi dersinin son konusu, elinizde bulunan fotokopinin demeye çalışıyorum. Son konusu Catherine Mansfield'in Miss Brill adlı eseri. Catherine Mansfield was born in New Zealand and began her career as a writer when she came to London in her 20s. After her first unsuccessful marriage, she met the editor and critic John Middleton Murray, who encouraged her in her writing and later became her husband. The death of her younger brother in the war in 1915 made a lasting impression on her, and the memories of their childhood together in New Zealand are recreated in some of her short stories. Catherine Mansfield's stories deal, pay attention, with the small everyday events of life and show a particular feeling and understanding for those who are lonely or isolated. Daha ziyade böyle çocuklar üzerine de çok yazmış. Burada da ifade etmeye çalıştığı gibi eserde everyday events diyor. Günlük olaylar anlatılıyor bakın yaşantıda. After a prolonged illness, she died of tuberculosis in Fontainebleau, France, at the age of 34. Her best-known collections of short stories include Bliss, The Garden Party, from which the story is taken, The Dove's Nest, and Something Childish. Kendim de bu çalışmaları yaptığım için, kitabını da yazdığım için Catherine Mansfield üzerine pek çok eseri Türkçe'ye çevrilmiş. İlgilenen kardeşlerim olursa alsınlar veya internette de bulabilirsiniz. Pek çok eseri mevcut. The story. Miss Brill, a middle-aged English teacher living in France, always loves to go to the park every Sunday to watch and listen to the people around. This Sunday, however, is different. Although it was so brilliantly fine, the blue sky powdered with gold and the great spots of light, like white wine, splashed over the jardin's publics. Miss Brill was glad that she had decided on her fur. The air was motionless, but when you opened your mouth, there was just a faint chill, like a chill from a glass of iced water before you sip. And now and again a leaf came drifting from nowhere, from the sky. Miss Brill put up her hand and touched her fur. Dear little thing. It was nice to feel it again. She had taken it out of its box that afternoon, shaken out the moth powder, given it a good brush, and rubbed the life back into the dim little eyes. What has been happening to me? Said the sad little eyes. What has been, said the little eyes. Oh, how sweet it was to see them snap at her again from the red eider down. But the nose, which was of some black composition, wasn't at all firm. It must have had a knock somehow. Never mind, a little dab of black sealing wax when the time came, when it was absolutely necessary. Little rouge. Yes, she really felt like that about it. Little rouge biting its tail just by her left ear. She could have taken it off and laid it on her lap and stroked it. She felt a tingling in her hands and arms. But that came from walking, she supposed. And when she breathed, something light and sad, no, not sad exactly, something gentle seemed to move in her bosom. There were a number of people out this afternoon, far more than last Sunday, and the band sounded louder and gayer. That was because the season had begun. For although the band played all the year round on Sundays, out of season it was never the same. It was like someone playing with only the family to listen. It didn't care how it played if there weren't any strangers present. Wasn't the conductor wearing a new coat too? She was sure it was new. He scrapped with his foot and flapped his arms like a rooster about to crow, and the bandsmen, sitting in the green rotunda, blew out their cheeks and glared at the music. Now there came a little floaty bit, very pretty, a little chain of bright drops. She was sure it would be repeated. It was. She lifted her head and smiled. Only two people shared her special seat. A fine old man in a velvet coat, his hands clasped over a huge carved walking stick, and a big old woman, sitting upright with a roll of knitting on her embroidered apron. They didn't speak. This was disappointing, for Miss Brill always looked forward to the conversation. She had become really quite expert, she thought, at listening as though she didn't listen, at sitting in other people's lives just for a minute while they talked round her. She glanced sideways at the old couple. Perhaps they would go soon. Last Sunday, too, hadn't been as interesting as usual. An Englishman and his wife, he wearing a dreadful Panama hat and she button boots. And she'd gone on the whole time about how she ought to wear spectacles. She knew she needed them, but that it was no good getting any. They would be sure to break and they would never keep on. And he had been so patient. He'd suggested everything. Gold rims, the kind that curled round your ears. Little pats inside the bridge. No, nothing would please her. They'll always be sliding down my nose. Miss Brill had wanted to shake her. The old people sat on the bench, still as statues. Never mind, there was always the crowd to watch. To and fro, in front of the flower beds and the band rotunda, the couples and groups paraded, stopped to talk, to greet, to buy a handful of flowers from the old beggar who had his tray fixed to the railings. Little children ran among them, swooping and laughing. Little boys with big white silk bows under their chins. Little girls, little French dolls, dressed up in velvet and lace. And sometimes a tiny staggerer came suddenly, rocking into the open from under the trees, stopped, stared, as suddenly sat down, flop, until its small high-stepping mother, like a young hen, rushed scolding to its rescue. Other people sat on the benches and green chairs, but they were nearly always the same, Sunday after Sunday, and Miss Brill had often noticed there was something funny about nearly all of them. They were odd, silent, nearly all old, and from the way they stared they looked as though they had just come from dark little rooms or even cupboards. Behind the rotunda, the slender trees with yellow leaves down drooping, and through them just a line of sea, and beyond the blue sky with gold veined clouds. Tam tam tam tiddle tam tiddle tam tam blew the band. Two young girls in red came by and two young soldiers in blue met them, and they laughed and paired and went off arm in arm. Two pheasant women with funny straw hats passed gravely, leading beautiful smoke-colored donkeys. A cold, pale man hurried by. A beautiful woman came along and dropped her bunch of violets, and the little boy ran after to hand them to her, and she took them and threw them away as if they had been poisoned. Dear me, Miss Brill didn't know whether to admire that or not. And now an ermine talk, and a gentleman in grey met just in front of her. He was tall, stiff, dignified, and she was wearing the ermine toque she'd bought when her hair was yellow. Now everything, her hair, her face, even her eyes, was the same color as the shabby ermine, and her hand, in its clean glove, lifted to dab her lips, was a tiny yellowish paw. Oh, she was so pleased to see him, delighted. She rather thought they were going to meet that afternoon. She described where she'd been, everywhere, here, there, along by the sea. The day was so charming, didn't he agree? And wouldn't he, perhaps? But she shook his head, lighted a cigarette, slowly breathed a great deep puff into her face, and even while she was still talking and laughing, flicked the match away and walked on. The ermine talk was alone. She smiled more brightly than ever, but even the band seemed to know what she was feeling, and played more softly, played tenderly, and the drum beat the brood, over and over. What would she do? What was going to happen now? But as Miss Beryl wondered, the ermine top turned, raised her hand as though she'd seen someone else, much nicer, just over there, and pattered away. And the band changed again and played more quickly, more gaily than ever. And the old couple on Miss Beryl's seat got up and marched away. And such a funny old man with long whiskers hobbled along in time to the music and was nearly knocked over by four girls walking abreast.